that I am prepared to make to the school committee as we go through these slides. Dr. Arnoff, if you would please. So tonight we're going to discuss, some of the data, staffing, and our student and staffing positivity rates, and finally a recommendation that I intend to make to the school committee. So as the chair indicated, the positivity rate is surging. Some folks have used that language, but is increasing in Rhode Island. Rhode Island is at 9%. East Greenwich is at 8%. I would say that that link is a live link. So, when you have the opportunity, please take a look at that. We will post that. One thing that's unique to East Greenwich, if you look at the data, is the amount of people that have tested in East Greenwich, and it was in excess of 60% as I look today. And if you look at surrounding communities, that's not necessarily the percentage of folks that are testing in other communities. So that's a little bit of setting the stage. This is our data as of today. We have had a total of 30 students that have tested positive in our district. It does include students, this list does include students that are full distance learners that aren't necessarily coming in our school. There are only 2 of those students though in this list. And there are 12 staff members that have been tested positive. And currently there is 1 staff member that is currently has recently tested positive and is working from home or sick, if you will. So that's our current data. I put this here since we're talking about data. This document was distributed to all families through their principal listserv, but really important information. If you are contacted by a Rhode Island Department of Health contact tracer, they will not ask you for a social security number. So if you get if you happen to be contacted by RIDO and you get a question about social security, you know that it isn't really an official RIDO person doing that work. So just an alert for everybody, and we will continue to communicate that. Because there was, as you can see, a fraudulently open credit card account that was when a social security number was provided. Next slide, Dr. Arnoff. So I presented this snapshot because I think it's really helpful for the community and for the committee to understand the challenges with staffing. So this was a snapshot today. And these are folks in our district that are remote teaching, just remote teaching. So this does not contemplate, as I said in here, regular absences or folks that are on leave. And in those regular absences or on leave, certainly substitute teachers are needed. How does somebody, what constitutes a remote employee? There are some that are remote teachers and staff members. We have paraprofessionals working in that capacity as well. That are working based on some criteria that the district set forth about being in person. There are others that are either their children are impacted because their children's school has closed, they have to quarantine, their child is home because they have to quarantine. So there are a variety of factors that contribute to a reason why an employee would have to teach remotely. And remember, we have to be mindful of having to staff our school. So, today, for example, in addition to the 25.5 remote teachers, there were additional, and this is across the district, an additional 40 teachers and staff members. It can include, it's everybody, that were out as well that needed coverage. This number can change with a phone call to Miss Emilio or myself at any moment in time where, and she deserves a shout out from me this evening, certainly Miss Emilio, our Human Resource Director, for trying to navigate all of this and provide coverage, and to our principals and our secretaries in our offices that are scrambling every day to try to provide coverage and make sure there's an adult in every classroom. Next slide, Dr. Arnoff. So, these are additional pressures on staffing. We have regular anticipated decline of substitutes in the district at this time of the year, and add COVID to it, it complicates the matter. But our surrounding communities have already made decisions to either be at distance learning at this time or implementing it in the near future. That FFCRA, that FICRA, that is the federal law that allows for any employee in any capacity, if their family is impacted by a school closure, that they are able to work at home or work remotely. And then, other metrics that exist in other towns. For example, I think I looked today, and I think the positivity rate in Central Falls was 26%. So, not everybody lives in East Greenwich. We have other folks coming into our buildings from other communities, municipalities. Next slide, Dr. Arnoff. So right now, and many of the folks that are on, I'm sure, attending as participants have been involved in some of our need to quarantine or isolate students. So I intentionally put quarantine and isolate, just to clarify that. Rhode Island Department of Health is the only body that can that can quarantine anybody. So with regard to this grade 5 classroom that's currently quarantined, they had already made that determination. So while the classroom is quarantined, there's 3 impacted staff members. So as you can see, that impacts other classrooms. Currently at Cole, there were 2 positive students this week, and students attend and, at the 50% mark, the A group and the B group. So the B group students are isolated, and there's a staff member on one team and 2 staff members on another team. And today we learned of a positive case at Meadowbrook. So right now there's 6 students isolated and 3 staff members. And what that process looks like from the district level, we provide all of the contact information to the Rhode Island Department of Health. They have asked us to be first responders, if you will. I use that term carefully, but make a determination at the school and district level in the short term. And then once we provide that documentation, they do reach out to, if they have the capacity to do that, to individual families and students that are impacted, and adults. With regard to, this slide should have been later, but with regard to our special populations of students, throughout the first quarter of this year, our educators and case providers have met with families to craft conditions of students' individual distance learning plans. Any recommendation I make in subsequent slides in-person services will continue to be provided on an individualized basis according to the collaboratively developed distance learning plans. And should any family have any question, whether it's a student in a special population or all of our students and our families, they're encouraged to contact for special populations, their child's special educator, or classroom teacher or principal, should there be any questions. Next slide, Dr. Arnoff. So why am I suggesting that the school committee contemplate a change right now? And these are some of the things that we grapple with every day. We are challenged with adequately being able to staff our schools safely at this point. And it's just a condition of, the surging rates in our state. When someone has any symptoms or is identified as a close contact, they need to stay home. It can be as innocuous as a runny nose and a headache, but they are required to stay home. And then depending on how their symptoms progress, whether or not a test is needed. But, staff member could wake up in the morning and, have a runny nose, as I said, or a headache, and then they must stay home. Longer term quarantine is needed when a positive person is living in your home. We have had 4 situations in the district, and that involves 24 days. So why is it 24 days? It is 24 days because the person that is positive has the ability to spread the virus in that first 10-day block. But the person that's living in the home is exposed to that person on the 10th day. So you have to add in 14 more days, which is an extended period of time. We did get updated guidance, but they didn't give us guidance on whether that has been reduced. I will be looking into that. And as I said in the previous slide, staff with children where schools are closed, will need to be home in some cases with their children if there is not other supervision or care for the children. Some of our own building substitutes have had to quarantine or have been positive, so we have lost some support in that, but Rose Emilio keeps plugging away at that, and this week we were able to bring in 2 new subs. So it is a revolving process for us. And I don't think we can disregard that, there has been some increase in cases in our district, nothing explosive, but this week, we have had more cases, and, there's clearly changing metrics in the state. Next slide, Dr. Arnoff. So I am making a recommendation to the school committee of really a very narrow transition to distance learning, just 8 days. And those 8 days would include the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd, and then the first week following the December break, with a goal of returning back on the 11th to our current model. But we would certainly review the conditions and any other recommendations that came forth. The one caveat here that I want to add is I'm also recommending an early release on Thursday of next week for our elementary students, to allow those teachers the afternoon and staff members to prepare materials for our youngest learners. And then they would come back on Friday and get those materials and be ready to learn at home. So again, it's a very narrow 8-day recommendation. Will allow us to, regroup with regard to staffing and take a look at current conditions and exposure in our district. And I am happy to provide any answers to you or address your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Meyer, and thank you. We are also really well aware. We've received, all of us have received a lot of communication and input from the community, and I just want to thank the community for your input. We hear you, and it's also not lost on us, Mrs. Meyer, how you're balancing some really strong competing needs, the health and safety of our school community overall, that's students, staff, faculty, and the community at large, as well as our primary purpose of providing an education to our students. So thank you for that, and thank you for the information. Just to preface and sort of frame our discussion, there are a couple of formalities that I didn't mention at the beginning, but just in terms of how we proceed, we'll open this up to the school committee first, and then we'll have public comment. Mrs. Meyer has made a recommendation. We will discuss. We can act on it tonight, whether we can approve or not approve it. We can table it until Tuesday. It's just simply another opportunity to discuss in this quickly moving scenario, really. Just a couple of additional, well, that's really it for those formalities. I also love it. I don't want to be too rigid, but if we could first entertain from the school committee, perhaps any clarifying questions, if there are any points of information that any of the members of the committee want to ask Mrs. Meyer before we move on to a broader discussion amongst the school committee, and then open it up to the public. So I would just first ask for if there are any clarifying questions. Dr. McEwen.
We don't hear you, Lori,
Can't hear.
but you did take it off of mute.
Yeah, we can't hear you. And while we don't, open meetings laws really preclude us from using the chat function, because this is an open meeting and the public cannot see our chat, so we really can't communicate that way. Although, Dr. McEwen, if you have specific questions that you want to send, one of us can ask them if you want to text me. Lori, Dr. McEwen is unmuted, but there's something happening with her setup. So it's just a message. So are there any other clarifying questions from the committee? And Dr. McEwen, if you want to text me, I can ask that question for you. Mr. Munoz.
Yes, Mrs. Meyer, maybe if you could just comment on two things quickly. Number one is, I know we get some mixed messages from RIDE, so they haven't given you any kind of specific guidance, even if it's not, a mandate. Are they making a suggestion one way or another, or this is a decision that we're reaching here in the district on our own? That's question one. And then question two, just to build on that, if you could talk for a minute about what the benefits are from your standpoint of this 8-day pause, what we would hope to, how we would hope to improve the situation. Is it that some of the staff and students that are out, could catch up? Is it just whatever in your mind you think the benefits are?
Certainly, I'm happy to answer your questions. With regard to RIDE, no, they haven't really provided any guidance, with the exception of a request earlier this week to resubmit our reopening plan and, reevaluate, what we had put forth. We have been working on that as a district. Mr. Pedraza actually has taken the lead on, just repeating what we had put in and updating it as necessary. What will the pause do, the 8-day pause? It will allow us to move beyond what is the post-Thanksgiving surge, which is what many communities are experiencing. So as I said, surrounding communities too have a great impact on our ability to have staff come in, and how those communities are responding. We essentially have to think about how we respond in kind. We will be beyond, that 2-week piece, which I think will help us get beyond everybody that's, isolating now and quarantining now. And hopefully folks heed the warning, about, staying home and being with, immediate family members over the holiday, because that is what is going to allow us to open our schools. I mean, it is a sort of all in it, this together effort in order to do this. So that, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
I don't know if Dr. McEwen, you went away and came back. Can we hear you yet?
Let's see.
Yes,
You can.
we can.
Ah! You'll regret that. That's not something you should cheer for. I don't know, Madam Chair, if you had a chance to ask my question, or if you'd like me to pose it. I'll pose it.
It sort of overlaps with Mr. Munoz's question, but please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry that I missed the response to that too. I understand the rising cases and your recommendation for December. I actually think that makes sense, especially given that we have a short week anyway. So if we can just sort of make it through to the 18th, I think that would be great. But my clarifying question was about the decision to go for those additional days in January, not come back till the 11th, and just wondering if that vacation pause that we take, if the numbers go down, and I don't even understand, it might not be possible for them to go down that radically, but if they did, would we contemplate an earlier date? And that may be something, Madam Chair, too, that we just think about in framing a vote on a recommendation, if it's all, part, etc.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen, for that question. I'm happy to answer that. We have, my recommendation is those 3 days plus the 4th through the 8th. of that first week, which allows us that similar pause that the governor is using in her language, giving a space of time to get beyond the post-Thanksgiving surge, which is what everybody is seeing right now, and then hoping that folks, what I had said in response to Mr. Munoz's question, that that we would, it gives us the ability to have other communities that are impacted by it as well. That's a huge impact to our staff if other communities are using those same dates, because our staff can't come in based on, being home with their children. So I think similar metrics between and among communities is, I think, has value in considering those.
Thank you.
Ms. Powell?
Thank you. Just along the lines of difficulties with staffing, is that due to anything particular? Is it just an overall unavailability of qualified people to cover, whether it be subs or people in the building, or are there other extenuating factors like competition or pay or any of those other things? I'm pretty much trying to think, if staffing is the issue, is there some other way we could support getting staff into the building? But if not.
So, it is the sheer numbers at this point. We have been very fortunate in being able to employ substitutes, and I did have a discussion with Ms. Emilio beforehand in terms of, compensation for that. And that right now we feel for the compensation that we have to pay our longer term subs, which many of these folks are doing, is adequate.
Right.
But, should we feel any different, should we feel that we need to come before the school committee and request an increase, we would do that.
Excellent.
We would do that.
And then I just had one more on special populations. Earlier in the reopening, when we were talking about special populations, we were talking about this sort of broader category of vulnerable students, as opposed to just either special services or IEP students. And I was wondering if this presentation considers that broader group, or if it's more limited to IEP or special students receiving services.
So thank you for that question. So when we use the terminology broader vulnerable populations, we have had some very intentional conversations around that. So I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking about that, students that we are concerned about with their well-being.
Okay.
And where school provides that care for them. So we have already have some intentional plans in place for addressing that, and we have begun those discussions inside the larger team meetings with our district social workers and our district school psychologists. Again, with regard to our student populations, Dr. Hughes, her leadership, and the case managers have met individually with families trying to craft how this can work. So those students that are able to engage virtually is really the question. Meaningfully in virtually is a metric for us to think about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any? Dr. Quinn, and then Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Superintendent, for the presentation. We've all been getting communications now from parents, and advocating for please don't end in-person learning, and clearly that's not at all what we're advocating here. The infection rates and the spike, the post-Thanksgiving spike and so forth is all stuff that's happening out of our control. But the bottom line is everyone agrees that in-person instruction is much better for students, particularly younger students, and they're also probably safer in the school environment than they are at home. But with that said, there are 500 people that work in the district that we need to make that happen. And right now, what I'm hearing is that that system is stretched to the breaking point, and we're simply taking a pause to let it recover. Was that a fair characterization?
It is far better than I said it, Dr. Quinn, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Quinn. Mr. Murphy, did you have?
Yes, to piggyback on that comment, I think we all have to be, and I think we all are mindful of the comments that we're receiving from our fellow citizens in East Greenwich. It's a very real concern, not just for me. I'm a parent of 3. I know there are a lot of people on this committee that have children or had children and in the district. So we know what it's like. We know it's challenging. Is there any way, I guess, I pose this question to Superintendent Meyer, is there any way we can even just, not even for optics, just for a feel good, it could be some way we can make it from 8 to 6, 8 to 5, just to shave off 3 days for some of the parents that are trying to reopen their businesses and trying to, break free from debt, and the students could use 3 days away from their parents as teacher. I'm just wondering, is there any way to trim that slightly? I'm not asking for a miracle, but if we can go 8 to 5 even, I think it's just maybe more meaningful to people psychologically, including myself. And I have a son who's IUP, so I think it's meaningful for him too. My second point is, we talked earlier, Dr. Quinn mentioned that obviously the younger students feel this more significantly than the older students. I saw that, I want to say the number at Cole and the high school are 9 and 9. So we're talking 18. That's, that's far beyond anything in the younger grades that they're seeing and in the experiences. Is there any way we could even, in addition to 8 to 5, say, is there any way we can just try to leave the door open for those grades K through 5? Because the numbers are lower. It's perhaps because the population of those schools are smaller than the populations of middle school and high school. I get that. But because the populations are smaller, it's a little bit more controllable. So would you mind responding to those 2 points?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I haven't, my recommendation is what it is this evening. I mean, your point is well taken in terms of, is there a way to look at it, in a lesser metric? But and we certainly, I certainly acknowledge that in person is the preferable way to do it. But it is less about, it's more about the critical nature and the urgent nature of our staffing and the ability to, have people in person with students, and also to prevent, the aspect of, having to cross over pods in the elementary schools to be able to adequately staff those classrooms. So, if you, in our opening scenario, and most opening, and this came from the RIDE guidance, the whole concept was around creating stable pods so that, you didn't cross-contaminate groups. The
Right.
fewer people that you have in the building, the less ability you have to supervise lunch, or have to supervise those in-person classrooms. So that's a concern.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
You did. It's challenging. It's almost, I don't say it's impossible to answer it without some back and forth. And I think that's why it's wonderful that we have a committee and we have this open dialogue. It's very hard to answer in one Q&A. Sometimes it takes a village, as they say, right?
Yes, it sure does. It sure does.
I believe Allison has something.
I think Mr. Hangen, I'll take Mr. Hangen first, and then Ms. Powell.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent. I have a few quick questions. Assuming the pause does not get approved, I mean, what do you see the options of the district? you know, and I want to piggyback to what Kevin said. I mean, is there a way to look at keeping at least K through 5? I mean, I have 2 daughters in the school, and so I understand the pain. Yesterday, I was at Lakeshore Learning yesterday getting math books because my daughter is falling behind. So I'm being I'm working and trying to be a teacher, and I know the whole district is they're under stress right now. But can you is there anything we can do to look into that? And again, what are the options if the pause does not get approved? What do you see the district's options?
Well, I mean, honestly, Mr. Hangen, I wouldn't make the recommendation if I didn't think that, it is the right thing for us to do as a district in this moment in time. And I get how it is. I hear you, I hear Mr. Murphy, and I know how challenging it is for every parent that has students in our schools. And really, that's what we really want, is to have our students in our schools. But right now, I would be not being honest if I didn't come forth and give you the actual picture of our staffing and how the broad impact is impacting our schools, with other schools pausing, and what that means for the ability of our staff to come in. I mean, if you think about it, just in the snapshot of today at Cole Middle School, we had 20 staff members who were remote teaching. That means that in all of those classrooms, you need somebody in there supervising students. And every time if person A is covering all these, going from classroom to classroom, you are increasing the risk for that person in particular and those students. So what I would say to you and to the school committee is to think about it just as these 8 days. I do know that I hear your points, Dr. McEwen, and other folks about considering a shorter span and look at the metrics. Is that a possibility? But I will say that, I've thought deep and hard about, along with the district staff, and I do think this is the right move for our district at this moment in time.
Thank you, Mrs. Meyer. Ms. Powell, did you want to have something else to say?
Yeah, it was just kind of a clarification, piggybacking off of Mr. Murphy. So, as I've been looking at through the recommendation, looking at the staffing numbers, I've been thinking about it in terms of sort of administrative burden. But just to clarify, I mean, the district has done an incredible job keeping our numbers low. We've seen almost no transmission. Our cases are low. We've done a fantastic job. All of you have done a fantastic job. And I think it might be a little obtuse of me that I didn't really think about it in this way before, but I think is what you're saying. If we fall any lower as far as staffing, it's not just a question of, having someone at lunch or having someone even in the classroom, but we will be unable to continue the efforts which have led to us having no transmission or low cases, because we will not have the ability to do all the administrative pieces that allow us to keep it that way. So it's not just a teaching thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So
Okay.
it's very possible. There was a day this week actually that I had to contemplate closing Cole because we didn't have enough staff in to be able to run the school. And you see that that's happening kind of regularly around the state, where superintendents are having to make those short-term decisions because you don't know. But yeah, there is that whole piece of, who's watching the children in the classroom while they're learning remotely. And
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pedraza.
Yes, if I may.
Chris.
The difference, I think, in many cases, because we tend to operate in terms of the schools that we're in, or the grade levels that we're at, essentially what we would be looking at if this were not approved is we're really at that tipping point of making a day-to-day decision about whether to close a school. And when it comes to a secondary school, think of it in terms of In the secondary schools, because we're not stable pods, we have some options of where we could buy ourselves some time with our larger spaces to make sure students were supervised, safe, sheltered. Where at the elementary level, if all of a sudden students were en route to school being dropped off and we discovered we did not have enough adults, we don't have those same options. We can't put kids into an auditorium or ask them to stay outside. It's just the level of supervision to meet our basic general safety and wellness requirements is what we're really putting in jeopardy. And then playing that out on a, well, do we have enough subs today? Do we have enough subs today in this building? Okay, what about the next building? So we're starting to lose that leeway of, for lack of a better word, preserving the sanctity of the pods. And therefore, once we compromise that at the elementary level, we get into the general well-being of every student, regardless of COVID. We're talking just basic supervision. And that is not off the table next week moving forward through. I mean, that's going to be, we are stretched. And so that's always a real possibility moving forward. And I would say that Superintendent Meyer and we've gone as, I think, as conservatively as we can, where we see some districts who are out starting today, next week, extending 2 weeks. I think in this one, we did the 21st through the 23rd to try to play into some of those natural tendencies, as well as then saying, okay, the 2 weeks from the 25th, we're not measuring 2 weeks from New Year's, where some people are going, okay, 2 weeks out after break because they're measuring that last big culturally social event, measuring that off of New Year's. We're measuring it off of the 2 weeks from Christmas. So that's our thinking, and ultimately potentially not going in that direction is what we're going to be dealing with next week, and what we've been dealing with is what we would be looking at, especially at the elementary level.
Thank you, Mr. Pedraza. I had a couple of comments as well. Dr. Mukio, do you want to go? Go ahead. Oh, sorry, just a couple. Just a few thoughts. Listening to the conversations, reading. I caught part of the governor's conference today, not the entire thing. A couple of things come to mind when we're talking about staffing issues, specifically with respect to substitutes. I mean, just confirm for me, or just clarify for me, it seems to me that it's really, and I don't mean to use an impersonal term, but our inventory is low statewide, despite, the statewide efforts to sort of fast track certification of additional substitutes. It's not that this is not a scenario in which we are less competitive, considering so many districts are shutting down entirely. Substitutes aren't working elsewhere instead of in East Greenwich, although that's certainly something that we're going to revisit, and we've talked about that when we increased the substitute pay several meetings ago. So I just want to confirm that. It's just the fact that we're a small state, we're being hit hard, and to be, and there just are fewer and fewer people, substitutes who are available. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. And in fact, the push to train all of the substitutes at the state level that many of you have seen, those smaller numbers have come out of those of actual substitutes that can work than have been communicated.
Thank you for that. The other, an observation that I want to make, a couple of them, is it really comes out of just the need or desire just to schedule additional time to talk about this, with things moving so quickly, information coming in. The governor didn't end the current pause. She increased it by a week. I mean, it's felt this whole time like almost like a game of chicken. I mean, there's a pandemic, and then how do we react to that? So we have that to keep in mind. But what was encouraging from what the governor had to say was her prediction, I'm not sure what it was, that they would make on-site testing available to schools in early January. So my sense is is that if we do decide that to give that extra week of cushion in January, that may be well timed to approach that light at the end of the tunnel, and it might give us that cushion. But those are just a couple of my observations. I guess I'll entertain maybe another comment or two quickly from the school committee, and then I do want to hear from the public. And then we can talk about whether we want to take action today, Tuesday, and how we want to approach this. Dr. McEwen?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. So a couple of things, and I think Ms. Musella, like you, I'd like to get to we have, hundreds of people here, and I know many of them want to share with us. Some of our conversation may preempt some of the comments that people came in with. I'll just say first, I'm heartened to hear that we're looking to try to get to the 18th. And as I said earlier, I think starting that holiday break, that 3 days, that makes sense. I want to thank you and Mr. Pedraza for framing what actually happens on the ground. This is not just, hey, let's get a sub, let's get our student in, let's get the teacher in, and all will be fine. When you're talking about being precipitous, about having to even contemplate closing an entire school, making those day-to-day decisions, that impacts the culture of the school, the climate of the school, and the education of the school. And we could train hundreds of substitutes, but that is not the teacher educating the student, especially if the teacher is out because he or she is sick or is tending to an emergency. Even the best sub plans aren't coming to life. Substitutes are to be used strategically here and there as necessary, but that's not a fill-in. So, and I think that our public and our parents understand that our students are not going to the same education that they've always had. So again, I'm appreciative of the 3 days added tacked on. I did have concerns about that week. I appreciate, Mr. Pedraza, you talking about that January week as an extension going forward from the Christmas holiday, which could be a spreading event. I do still have, some questions about whether we should be looking at the data or if we should make that decision preemptively. I could really be swayed either way on that. The question that I think could come up from the public is, if others are closing down, to your inventory point, Ms. Musella, if others are closing down, is that freeing up substitutes? So not everyone will be swayed by my comments about whether or not, we should or should not utilize substitutes as much as we might need to. But there could be the question, if all of these surrounding towns are shutting down, then substitutes would have the opportunity to work and be available to us. Is there a response to that the committee could hear before that might get opened by community members?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that, Dr. McEwen. Certainly, that would be a reasonable conclusion, that there would be more, people available. But, we have to be mindful of the whole aspect of a global pandemic and people moving from community to community that might be problematic. So I can tell you that we have a sub that tested positive this week. We are fortunate that in this case that substitute was not in during the infectious period. But had he been in, we would have been looking at several classrooms that would have had to move to distance learning. So that, it's all very complex in terms of not necessarily black and white answers with regard to every scenario that sits before us. But it's maybe we would have more substitutes, certainly, that would be interested.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer, Dr. McEwen. I think we're going to turn to the public. I think technically we do have a public comment policy which says that we try to limit public comment to 3 minutes each. I don't want to censor anyone. I just want to be mindful that there are 321 attendees. We've heard a lot of feedback, and just to be mindful Just with respect to Zoom, there are phone controls. There are a lot of people who have dialed in. So for Zoom participants, if you want to raise your hand and you're in by phone, it's *9 to raise the hand, *6 to mute and unmute. And just for those who can't see us, and I should have said this at the beginning, the panel briefly consists of, as you've heard, Superintendent Meyer, Assistant Superintendent Michael Pedraza, and the full school committee. So that's me, Dr. McEwen, and in the order in which I see people, Dr. Quinn, Ms. Powell, Mr. Munoz, Mr. Hangen, and Mr. Murphy. And then we also have Dr. Arnoff and our clerk, Mrs. DeMeglio. So with that, the first hand raised is Ms. Bucca.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for giving me a moment to speak. I really wanted to say a very sincere thank you to Mrs. Meyer, and I'm just really happy to see that in this big decision that is very important, that special populations were directly addressed. Sometimes in the all child, all students philosophy, we only talk about things that are about kids holistically rather than realizing that different groups of kids are different and some of them warrant some extra communication and consideration. And a lot of times the principals and district just don't communicate about students with IEPs. It only comes from the director and usually afterward. So I want to say, thank you for acknowledging our students at the same time as you acknowledge the other students. I really appreciate that. That to me is really an all-child agenda. And I also wanted to say thank you for making a decision that recognizes that while we are all impacted by lack of childcare and that in-person learning is always better for all kids and that it's an inconvenience and it's unpredictable, but there are some kids in this district that really truly cannot access distance learning, and these changes perpetuate inequities and very detrimentally to certain populations. And I just really want to say this is the first time I've ever seen this district, this school committee at this level acknowledge that difference. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bucca. Next, we have Mr. Boie. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for your time. For those of you who don't know, the new school committee members, I'm a teacher at Cole Middle School, and I think Mr. Murphy might know about me because I am her daughter's teacher, his daughter's teacher. I just want, hearing all the words that you guys are saying, I just think it's important that we point out the sacrifice your teachers are making right now. For example, and I am not trying to make a change happen because I do not feel like my words are going to change, but due to your changing of the distance learning on the Monday before Christmas break, I will not be able to see my parents for the holidays. But I have a dozen students who are already quarantining so that they can travel for the holidays. Your teachers have been Herculean. Your paras, your secretaries, your administrators have been Herculean to get to this point in time. And I just want the public to hear how the staff at East Greenwich Public Schools have sacrificed so much. And you changing to a Monday, the 21st distance learning will make us sacrifice our families, which we already did for Thanksgiving, to attend our family gatherings. I just want you to hear, and I want everyone to know, as Ms. McEwen makes comments about shortening the break and to changing the break and maybe making the break less, that your teachers have been sacrificing, all of your staff members have been sacrificing so much. And if no one else tonight is going to say it, I think it needs to be said publicly, how much we have been killing ourselves to make this work. And it's not the same. Anyone who thinks we can do in-person learning with less than 6 feet is, in my opinion, scientifically crazy. We are doing the best we can, and to expect that we're going to do so much more in person than what we are currently doing is insane. We are doing the best that is humanly possible, and as a result, we have not spread the virus as much as other communities. So I applaud my administrators, Mrs. Meyer, Mr. Pedraza, for the listening that they have done to the teachers, trying the best we can. But the public pressure needs to be stated. We cannot do more than we're doing. And by what we're doing, we are giving up visitations to our family members. My elderly parents will now not get to see me as a result of your decisions tonight, unless you change the proposal on the table. But I am willing again to sacrifice what we are doing so that your students can be taught in the best possible way we can do this pandemic. Everyone needs to understand a personal sacrifice is being made. And I want my teachers, my staff, my colleagues, my team to hear I want the community to hear how much we're giving up, because we hear the comments that our people in the town are making. We see the posts on Facebook. We see what is being said about how we should all look in the mirror, as the governor said today. And we are doing the best we can. So thank you for trying to consider the pause. But even this pause is going to be a huge sacrifice on your staff, who will be in next week, who will come to school next week, and will do the best they can, while many parents take their kids out of school next week and travel on the holiday. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Bowie. I certainly, as a parent of 2 students in the district, personally have a deep appreciation for what everyone is doing, and I'm sure everyone does. And I do get concerned that when our faculty and staff don't feel appreciated, particularly in this environment. So I just thank you for your comments. Peter Carney.
Good evening. Thank you. You hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I'm not sure what the particular metric was that we've exceeded at this point. I think it is, it seems to be revolving around, staffing far more than any kind of transmission. Is there a particular threshold that we could expect to know that we've met and not be concerned about further expansion of this beyond what's being proposed tonight, whether that's staffing levels or statewide spread? Is there anything concrete that we could be made aware of?
I will say, typically during public comment, we don't entertain questions as such particularly, but my understanding from Ms. Meyer's presentation and from Mr. Pedraza's presentation is that we're really at that breaking point now with respect to staffing. So I appreciate your comments. Do you have any additional comments, Mr. Carney?
No, well, maybe the committee could pose that if it's not going to be allowed to be proposed by the public. I just we just be interested in a goal line. I think I'm sure many other people would be as well. So coming out of this, if it is voted on and accepted by the school committee, that what we would be looking at for particular numbers come early January.
I see your point, Mr. Carney. It's a point well taken. Thank you. So in other words, what are there data points with respect to staffing that would trigger that we're clearer to return, or we're in a better position?
Yes.
Ms. Meyer, do you want? I think it's permitted. Do you want to address that?
Sure.
Briefly.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Madam Chair, and Mr. Carney, thank you for your question. I would say that our breaking point would be very similar to what it was yesterday at Cole Middle School. I mean, the challenge with all of this is it's such a fluid situation. So, you meaning I typically am the person that gets informed of what the conditions are, whether it is related to somebody having tested positive or unable to come into the building, or learning about a positive test result. Oftentimes it's late at night, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, where we are forced to respond. But when our secretaries that are in the building, we check with them regularly, especially the middle and the high school, because that's where it's most impacted. I would rely on them to tell me I can't cover the classes today. Both Mr. Pedraza and I and some of the central office staff have also been available to cover classes when need be. So we are doing everything that we possibly can as a district. But I'm trying to remember your first question. One was about the staffing. Oh, the state metric. I think we would, anything at the state level with regard to, let's go back a little bit. When we were looking at metrics to open our schools, the metric that was communicated by the governor was, a 5% infection rate. And that was the initial metrics that she was using to create how to open schools. Clearly, we've learned a great deal since June and July of last year related to the virus. But, the state is at 9%. The district is 8%. So I don't know how I would answer the metric question, because those benchmarks or lines in the sand, if you will, change based on how they are interpreting data at the state level. And they would, again, they continue to look at the data, and they continue to collaborate with the Rhode Island Department of Health to determine how they are managing all of this. I hope that answered your question.
Is that helpful, Mr. Carney?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you very much. Lorraine Martin. I think, Mrs. Martin, you are on mute. I don't know if that's on your end or our end with Dr. Arnoff.
She's permitted to speak.
Yeah. Mrs. Martin, you're on mute right now, so we can't hear you. Yeah, I think you're still on mute. What we can do is, there are 4 other people with their hands raised. Maybe what we can do is, there she goes. Nope. You're still on mute, Mrs. Martin. I'm sorry. What we can do is perhaps come back to Mrs. Martin, and let's go to the next member of the public with their hand raised. And that's Danielle, just the first name.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment about, it's not just the staff in the school, but the drivers and the monitors are being affected as well, which means a driver and a monitor that have to quarantine, come out, then that's when people from other districts have to come in, just like with the substitute. It is very hard on them, and, trying their best to do everything they can, for the kids on the bus and keep our family safe, plus the kids. And, I just want to say thank you to all of the staff at the schools and all the drivers and monitors doing their part.
Thank you, Danielle. We also appreciate, we're in great appreciation of the as a former chair of the transportation subcommittee, I'm in deep appreciation of our drivers, our monitors, the relationships that they have with our kids and our faculty. So we really appreciate your comments. Thank you. Next is A. Watson, I believe.
Hi, Amy Watson. My 2 boys attend Cole as well as East Greenwich High School. So I first want to thank you all. This is not a situation anyone is going to win with. It's a lose-lose for everybody. And I'm in the position where I did register my boys to attend school Thursdays and Fridays in the hybrid learning model. And it's gone unprecedentedly well, considering all variables. But most recently at Cole, my son does not want to go to school because there's 3 other students, a substitute, and a teacher that's teaching remotely to the class. So I have to question academics. And we can't allow education to interfere with our academics. And we're learning, and we're all learning during this time. And my concern no longer goes out to the students, but to the adults, the faculty, the staff members. They're all at their breaking point. And it's time for us to consider social emotional, not just for students, but for all adults. And you could hear it in the teacher's voice who spoke earlier, and I'm hearing it in my colleagues' voices. So I just want to thank you all, but we can't always put the children first. In the airline, they ask you to put the oxygen mask on the adult. And I think that's something that needs to be considered at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Watson, and thank you for being here. Andrea Nelson. And Ms. Nelson, you may speak, but you appear to be on mute, so we can't hear you yet. There
Can
you
you
go.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I agree with Danielle. I'm just wondering, does your son still take the bus?
I'm sorry, Ms. Nelson, who are you addressing?
You.
You're asking if my son takes the bus? That's a personal question, and I don't have to answer that in a public forum, so I will decline not to, but I would be happy to talk to you offline about that.
Okay, thank you. I know he doesn't, so just, saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. Ms. LeBlanc?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for your time. I just wanted to comment on a few things. I guess I think Mr. Murphy had some excellent points. I do have to say, as both a parent and an educator, I do have concerns, and I am very concerned about the elementary students in particular. I think, they're in the elementary levels. This is so important, their elementary years, and just that's where they get their foundation. And lost a big chunks last year. They lost time the beginning of the year, the first 3 weeks. I'm looking back at the numbers of employees per school who have been out, and the elementary levels, they seem low. I mean, Eldridge has 0, for example, Meadowbrook 1. I don't know. I kind of feel like this may be more of an issue and a staffing issue, like at Cole with the 15, maybe even the high school. I guess I would really like to ask the committee and the superintendent to really take some time and think about it before we put the elementary schools in this model. I just think it's really important for the students to be in school, getting that hands-on experience, both for the education, for social, emotional. I just think it's really important that they're in school. Aside from the students, I really think as educator, it's what's in the students' best interest. And I just can't express enough how it's important to have them in school in person. But also coming at it from another angle, you're also putting families in a situation as well, because an elementary student can't stay home and distance learn as can a high school student or even a middle school student. So now we have an added factor of putting families in financial hardships because they are taking time from work, or they are trying to work from home and teach their child. So it's difficult across the board. So I guess I'm just asking to really think about it. And if there's a way that we can keep these elementary students in school, or do something similar to what Mr. Murphy had suggested, and maybe shorten that pause for them, I just think it would be great. So that's what I'm asking.
Thank you, Ms. LeBlanc. Julie Fiddler is next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm joining a little late. So I don't know if this was addressed or not. I'll try not to make it a question, but I'm wondering, I feel like the the attestation form that we fill out in the mornings when our kids go to school, I feel like that needs to be readdressed, relooked at, and to better reflect what's happening. Questions like, did you attend a party where people were unmasked? Were you, outside of your household? Did you, whatever whatever we're not supposed to be doing, just to get a real sense of, who is coming into the schools.
Thank you, Ms. Fiedler. Lorraine Martin?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Great. I'm glad. I'm hoping to get a few things addressed. One, I did send an email to Superintendent Myers, as well as the school committee members, regarding substitute rates. And I listened to Ms. Powell bring those rates up to Superintendent Myers, and I believe it came across as they are adequate. I am very much, I strongly feel that it is not a supply issue. When there's a demand and there's a supply, you have to be competitive, and the rates are not competitive in East Greenwich. I personally know this because in other school districts, my per diem substitute school nurse rate is significantly higher than I would get offered in East Greenwich. Therefore, I do not apply to East Greenwich to be a substitute school nurse. And I know that that's the case for regular teachers that aren't school nurse substitutes, but regular school substitute teachers. Just when the rate is $85 to $140, even $150 for 6.5 hours worth of work, that equals $13 to like $22 an hour. It's sad. I pay my babysitter anywhere from $15 to $20 an hour to watch one child. So I really would like to stress that before we, pause school or take this break or even vote on this break, to bump up the per diem substitute rate for teachers and see what we could attract, and see if we could adequately staff our schools so that we do not have to take this break, at least on the elementary school level. And I would also like to address the teacher that was speaking. I'm hoping he's listening to me. I work as a pediatric nurse at Hasbro Children's Hospital, and guess where I'll be on Christmas Day? I'll be at Hasbro Children's Hospital. I haven't seen any of my family since July, and I won't get to see my family again probably until the summertime, because if I travel out of state to see my family with my daughter, she would be required to quarantine at home for 14 days, which we cannot do. So, and to also address that, that teacher, we're not supposed to be, based on the governor's orders, supposed to be attending any gatherings outside of our family, at least for the next 2 weeks. So the whole, haven't seen your family, I get it. It stinks, but it's like our jobs, and the kids need to come first. And I just take very much offense to it. But I really stress, thinking hardly about before pausing school or taking any leave from school, to do our best to attract school substitute teachers, or even allowing teachers that need to quarantine, just having that school classroom, stay at home, and distance learn with that teacher that say needs to quarantine for 14 days, which to my understanding that quarantine number has decreased due to new CDC guidelines. So I would hope that you guys would look at the new guidelines before making this decision as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Martin. Dr. Van Posnak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you. I am speaking to echo the sentiment that I hope that the elementary schools in particular can be looked at, as those are the children that have been shown to need school the most, as well as to need care the most. They are also the children, speaking as a doctor, who are least likely to contribute to the pandemic, in that we know young children seem not to spread this in the way that teens and adults do. What I'm hopeful for is that the school committee and staff of the schools can look at this problem much the way the state and the Department of Health have, in terms of targeted interventions rather than a global intervention, so that obviously early in the spring, when we knew this pandemic was coming, but we didn't know much about it or how it would spread, we had to shut down everything. But now that we know more about how it spreads, we're able to better target what we need to shut, and how long we need to shut that for in order to make a difference. I think that's particularly important for our elementary students because, again, they're the ones that really are at a pivotal time in their learning. They're still learning to read, not reading to learn. They also don't have, well, in the younger grades, I'll speak for my first grader, they don't have the capacity to sit in front of the computer, particularly unsupervised, for a very long time. So I'm hoping that more thought can be given to targeting the interventions that we need to take in terms of particular schools. Obviously, that is more work. Obviously, that requires a lot more finesse. But I'm hopeful some thought and consideration can be given to that. Lastly, also kind of thinking in the medical mindset, the only way for working parents to obtain care for these kids is to bring someone who is not in their home into their home to watch their children, or to send children into another person's home to receive care. That's something that we're very specifically not supposed to do right now. So in a way, it's actually increasing risk. So that's my other thought for the younger grades, that we will need to increase our family's risk if these children are out of school for prolonged periods.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate your comments, and I also know from conversations with Mrs. Meyer that she's been in close collaboration with Dr. Silversmith, Dr. Rani in our community, and we've received your email as well as emails from other medical professionals. So I just appreciate your comments, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
We have 4 more hands raised, and then we have to still determine whether or not to take action. I just saw a 5th go up, and I think I'm going to, if we could try to focus our comments, if there's a point that you might want to raise that hasn't been raised already, I think that might be constructive, although I don't want to cut anybody off or censor anybody, but just for us to be mindful of the time. Kristen, Karen. if I'm saying that correctly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I just want to say that I first appreciate everything you guys have done. And I think I have a child at Eldridge and I have a child at Cole. And I think the teachers are doing a fabulous job. They have really gone above and beyond in this really impossible situation. As I listen to what everybody's saying, what I'm struggling to, I guess, figure out in my head is hours ago, I watched the governor's, her press conference, her weekly press conference, and she's up on stage saying that the school districts, the schools have all the resources they need to stay open. They have testing, they have substitutes, that the state has everything that the towns need. And yet I'm hearing you guys say that you don't have that. So I'm just trying to figure out where the disconnect is between what the governor is saying and what's going on here in our town. And I want to just also reiterate what Mr. Carney said earlier, just to have a metric, and I know not to pose it as a question, but just something for everyone to think about, just to have a metric to communicate with us so that when the beginning of January comes, we can look at that metric and say we've hit this goal and we know we can send our kids back, or we're nowhere near this goal, and the parents can make plans to keep the kids home some more. So I guess I'm just trying to, figure out those two things.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments very much. And I suspect that all of our administrators would love some metrics federally, statewide, so that we wouldn't have to sort of make them up on our own, frankly. But your point is well taken, as was Mr. Carney's. Thank you. Brian Vaughn.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I definitely feel fortunate that we're in a position where we're actually having a dialogue and we're still having our schools available to us for our children. I know we're very lucky to be in that situation compared to many other across the country. So thank you for everybody making that effort, to make that possible. 2 points that I wanted to share or make is, well, 3, I guess. One is, hopefully we consider tabling the vote to allow dialogue amongst the board and others for Tuesday. My second one would be, I also echo other parents and Mr. Murphy's comments about the elementary schools and stuff like that, with distance learning being very challenging to keep their focus in the game. And then my third point is something that hopefully might be considered in that potential dialogue is, if we're going to look at keeping the length of the break or the pause, it might be worth considering to finish out this half of the school year as originally planned, and then maybe put on the 2 weeks of break or 8 days of break after the new year, considering the likelihood that people are not going to follow recommendations and they're going to continue to travel or see people outside of their household. We should expect another increase in cases or percentage of positives. So it might be mindful to be cognizant that that's likely going to happen. And if we position that time after the first of the year, we might be in a better position to ride out that next wave. So thank you for the opportunity and take care.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that Mrs. Meyer in particular is trying to weigh the balance of making a decision with enough notice to the community versus waiting to see where we're at with our statistics. Appreciate your comment. Thank you. Next is Jen A.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, thank you. This is Jen Armstrong. I wanted to make a comment, just an observation that I've had. I'm a teacher in the school district. I teach middle school, and I'm actually teaching remote this year. The district was kind enough to allow some teachers to teach remote this year, which I feel very blessed about. But on a more important note, teaching remotely has been extremely difficult for me, but what I've noticed is that the students are building character during this time. And there's so many silver linings about this. I think they're learning lessons that they possibly might not have learned in this case. They're learning to be more compassionate. They're learning to be more giving, and they're learning to be more forgiving of themselves in processes. And I think that, when we talk about education in person and distance learning, I'm sure it's different on every level. I have 2 elementary daughters myself that are learning remotely because they have to for their health. And it's everybody's responsibility. It's the teacher's responsibility, it's the student's responsibility, and it's the parent's responsibility. And I understand that adds a lot to everybody's plate. But one thing I just wanted to stress was that, distance learning can work. And we're fortunate to have the technology to do that. And one of the things that really sticks out to me in the state's law on education is, the wellness of the students and the employees. And nobody asked for this pandemic. But I think that maybe, if possible, I don't even know if this is possible, but I wanted to throw it out there. Is there a way to go back and survey the parents, the population again, and see, maybe who does have the ability to keep their children home for a period of time now that our rates are so high? And maybe this might limit some of the children in school, and so then the staff might be able to be limited for a little bit. I know that's probably going against, I don't know, something within educational law, students, having, it being equal for every student. But it almost feels like, in a crisis situation like this, maybe we could think outside of the box a little bit more. I've watched East Greenwich from the beginning, the administration. I think they've handled this unbelievably well. I think in every step of a crossroad, they've had a conversation. I think it's wonderful that the public feels that they can weigh in. But I don't think that, especially at the higher level, that people should be afraid of distance learning, because I think there are a lot of students, a very high percentage, that are actually learning more in this situation. So I just wanted to weigh in and say that I wanted to put that on the table. I didn't know if there was a way, to survey that and see if maybe the numbers may work out. So thank you again for the opportunity to talk, and thank you for everything that you do for us teachers and our students.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. I really appreciate your comments and your feedback. We'll take 3 more. Those are the hands that are raised now. So Ms., forgive me, Poirier?
Yes, good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm here also with my husband. We've been listening to the school committee meeting, and I appreciate everybody's time this evening. I just also wanted to highlight the governor's press conference this afternoon, that she was not making any kind of recommendations in regards to changing models as of right now. I know in the past she had suggested if the district wanted to have the higher grade levels go to distance learning, she would support that decision. And I commend, East Greenwich for deciding not to do that. I thought that was a great thing for us to try to stick with it. Maybe at this point it's time to reconsider for the older grades to do the district distance learning, and the younger kids to continue in person. Not only are the younger grades, out of school and not in person, but as parents, I essentially take time out of work. I've already left one job to teach my kids distance through the fall and now through the winter. And when they are home, I'm home teaching them. So I know there's a lot of considerations. My husband's here too and had a comment as well. I'll pass it to him.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for all that you are doing and for entertaining 2 comments. Perhaps this has occurred, but if it hasn't, my ask to the school committee tonight is to hold the vote of Mrs. Meyer's proposal and instead vote on a proposal of what a critical staffing minimum looks like, which would warrant closing the schools. I understand that a decision can't be made at the last second for something like this, But we do know the recommendations change daily, sometimes hourly. And I feel making this decision now is premature. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate your comments. Next is Carla.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I just wanted to say one gratitude for the work that everyone here has done, because I know that this is the point that we didn't want to get to, right? Like, we didn't want to have to close again, but we knew it's what we all dreaded. And I know that no decision that you folks make is taken lightly, because at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people in the community, and that's to be expected. No one can be satisfied, but I also want to call for a lot more grace, because you guys are doing so much right now. And also want people to think about the fact that, yes, and I understand the concern for elementary students, but I also think about our educators. I don't know young students who are so emotionally sensitive in a room with an educator who is at their breaking point, who is so stretched to the limit. That's a different kind of trauma. Yes, being home, not being in school is one trauma, but being in a room with an adult who is going through a traumatic crisis, a global crisis that we're all experiencing, is a different kind of trauma as well. So I think a pause and a break isn't as evil or as awful as it sounds, and it's going to be hard. Any decision is hard, and I have a decision for my family that makes me feel comfortable, and I knew that at the end of the day, any decision, people are going to be in hard spots. But I just want to say that it's complicated. Let's remember that all of us are in this, and it's hard. Just thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments a lot. Ms. Gorder, our last public comment of the night, Ms. Gorder. Except that you're on mute. We see you, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say that I'm a teacher at Hannaford, and we are just regular people. We also have families with kids in school getting quarantined. I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I've been quarantined twice. So the biggest problem with this is, if there are no subs, how do we run schools? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gorder. That was the last of the public comments. Now we can choose to take action on Ms. Meyer's recommendation. We can do nothing. We can just talking about it again on Tuesday. If the committee wants more information, we had significant dialogue and input from the public, which I really appreciate. Just a point of clarification, I wanted to, and I went back and I asked Ms. DiMeglio to go back, so that I wanted the wording of the motion that was made to move us into to approve Ms. Meyer's plan to begin with. And that motion, just the wording was just, this spoke to like who has the authority to make this decision that may or may not be before us. The motion was to support the superintendent's recommendation to return to all in-person learning pre-K through 5 at Meadowbrook, Frenchtown, Hannaford, and Eldridge to begin October 6, 2020 and thereafter, and to adhere to the statewide calendar and have in-person school for those elementary students while permitted by the state, and that the district will continue its commitment for high-quality learning to any student who chooses to distance learn during the pandemic. So it's pretty clear that if we are to revert to distance learning for a portion of time, pursuant to Ms. Meyer's recommendation, that is our call. It is an appropriate action for us to take or not take if we want to deviate. Not take if we want things to remain as they are. So with that said, I would entertain a motion. Mrs. Meyer.
I just want to make 2 clarifying points before you engage in your discussion. One was with regard to the substitute. Oh, Dr. Quinn has his hands up.
Yes, I see you, Dr. Quinn. So I was going to have you after Mrs. Meyer. Yes, Dr. Quinn?
So if you recall, certainly former school committee members, not current new school committee members, the committee approved a pay increase for our substitute nurses. And so they are compensated at $200 a day. Miss Emilio reminds me that, it might not be so much of a compensation as, concern for folks' well-being coming into school. So that's one piece. The other piece I wanted to clarify, that slide that was in there regarding noting remote teaching, those were just the remote teachers on that day and time. That did not contemplate anybody that's on leave or regular folks that were ill on that day, which was an additional 50 staff members on that day. Just a point of clarification, because I might not have been clear on that. My apologies.
Thank you, Mrs. Meyer, for the clarifications. Dr. Quinn?
So our council is not present at this meeting. Is that correct?
He was not able to attend. That's
Okay.
correct.
In the past, I mean, I've asked questions about, what's our jurisdiction on this, because the law is pretty clear on what our responsibilities are, and I believe the answer that council gave last time, and it was it was a different situation, but he said, well, in these circumstances, we're obligated to accept the recommendations of the superintendent. It seems to me this is an operational question, right? And I wish council were here, because I think that means that we need to accept the recommendation of the superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. We can certainly, if we want to take action on this, we can wait until Tuesday if you're more comfortable with him present and you'd like to talk to him, have him speak to the entire committee. I checked with him beforehand, and my recollection was not from the last meeting that we were obligated to accept the superintendent's recommendation. This is my recollection, and that's why I went back to him to get clarification from him as to whether or not we were empowered. We're the ones who have to take the action, yes or no, to approve or disapprove. The authority rests with us. As a matter of practice, we tend to take the superintendent's recommendation. That's my recollection, and that's my conversation with him leading up to this meeting. But certainly we can wait until Tuesday when he will be present if that would make everybody more comfortable. And that's a factor in deciding whether to take action tonight. So thank you. Mr. Murphy, did your hand fly up and down?
I would like, it was up, but I wanted to give you your space. I'd like to wait until Tuesday.
Yeah. So unless somebody wants to make a motion one way or the other with respect to Superintendent Meyer's recommendation, we will just continue this discussion until Tuesday. Dr. McEwen.
I just wanted to ask, and this may go to what Mr. Murphy was saying. I agree. I'm happy to wait until Tuesday, but it would be waiting with the purpose of, the place that gave me pause, as I mentioned, was for me personally was around the January part of the return to distance learning. I see that we are ramping up. I hear that we are at a breaking point right now. I think a better understanding of why 2 weeks of time at distance learning wouldn't be enough. I heard what Mr. Pedraza said, certainly, and it was compelling, but we also heard folks talk about a metric. And so I am wondering if we should blanket go to distance learning until that date in January, or if it should be an if-then scenario. And so that would be a point of clarification for me that I'd want to get by Tuesday, or have discussion about on Tuesday. I'm just trying to frame what the questions might be that we might need answered to give the administration time to think about that before we come together on Tuesday. If that
and your questions, Dr. McEwen, what you want to answer or specifically with respect to what metrics might we look to make a determination really in January?
In January, would we say as a body, the motion could be something like, we approve this pending X sort of numbers in January, so that if somehow, some way the numbers dropped, vaccines were made available on December 26th, something that we don't anticipate happening. But if that scenario occurred, that it wouldn't be, it's like a snow day. We assume there's a storm coming, everything says there's a storm coming, but if the storm doesn't come, we've got 5 days now that we've put kids at home. I just want to make sure that we're doing that for all the right reasons at that point.
Thank you. I'm Mrs. Meyer and Mr. Pedraza. I don't know if there's any other data or way to compile the data before Tuesday. We can certainly see what might be available, given the many moving parts, and if it's even possible to do that sort of thing and come up with a metric. But I appreciate, that comment and those. Ms. Powell?
No, I was just gonna say, I know people were asking for like a staffing metric, because what we're saying is we're having trouble with staffing. But would that even, I mean, is there a critical number of staff? Because from what I'm hearing, it's that this is so fluid on a day-to-day basis. And the reason it's getting to a breaking point is that even though right now in our particular school buildings, cases have been low, they're so high everywhere else that we're being impacted from all kinds of places. And so it's those numbers that are keeping people home with their kids, that are closing other districts, that are contributing to the staffing numbers. So that it might not necessarily be a staffing number, but more when we've hit a certain prevalence, then we can expect to have so many people out all the time. I mean, I don't know. That seems like a difficult, from everything I've been listening to tonight, it seems like because this is happening, I mean, I know we had last week, we had to send a class home in the middle of the day. I mean, everyone was at school and then they had to leave. I'm actually wondering if right now you could think of what kind of metric you could even come up with that would be informative or illustrative for us to be able to set as something we could do, because it didn't sound like that. I was having trouble thinking of what that number could be based on this conversation. So just wondering if you had an idea.
To that end, I've been, because it came up in public comment, I'm trying to think of how to quantify that, but then also maybe getting back to my original comment too, is that it is different at each school level, because at the secondary level, you have opportunities where teachers have planning periods and have opportunities to then cover another person in the building, that is not then extended so much at the elementary level, unless that person is also a part of that pod. To your point, Ms. Powell, is that I think in many cases, we can definitely take a look, but it is about that predictability, that reliability, that, the throughout the course of the day, kind of calming down and getting back to normal, and getting some lower numbers, because I think we're also to that point that when we start to quarantine or isolate, when people are isolated more, finding, is it an entire classroom? That doesn't actually, when it's an entire classroom, that doesn't have a substitute impact. It's if it's just the teacher. And so that's one metric, but again, at each grade level, it's different. We can definitely look into it, but it's more the predictability of the consistent number coming in and the consistent number of absences occurring with both faculty and staff depending on each grade level. So I'm sorry, it seems kind of convoluted as I'm going through it, but it is really a moving puzzle every single day.
So I'll just, the metrics are hard, to Mr. Pedraza's point. So here's a practical example so that you can really understand it from the boots on the ground. the most critical situation that we've had, and every principal, most of the principals will say to me regularly, I don't know if I'm going to be able to cover my building. Most of them are covering classes on a regular daily basis, covering lunches on a regular daily basis. It's just part of how we are operating now, as a matter of, because we're on a, we're just in this, most unusual of moments. So that the most critical day was at Cole. At night, I had an email from the school secretary. As I say to the kids, what was my claim to fame? And my claim to fame was I was principal at Cole Middle School for a long time. So I'm very familiar with how that process works. She sent me a picture of the coverage that she had. And she said, can you come in and do periods 3, 4, and 5, whatever they were? And there was some sarcasm in there, but there was some realistic request in there. And I reached out to Miss Emilio at night, and this is what a day looks like every day. And I said, is there any other sub that we can send over to Cole? At the last minute, she was able to send somebody over there. But we were that close, because you don't know. So I don't know. I mean, I'd have to sit with Mr. Pedraza and Miss Emilio and think about what a number is, because I don't know that we would say, if 40% of the people were out on a day, there would be no way that we would be able to cover. I think that's what folks are looking for. So maybe we can try to quantify that. But I think it's really important for everybody to remember every district surrounding us is going to be doing the same thing or has already done that. That impact, I expect the Southern superintendents, that most of the Southern superintendents to make similar decisions in the coming days. So we have to remember that we have a lot of people that live in different municipalities, that this will impact their ability to come to work. But we can work on that. We can try to work on a metric to provide you at least on Tuesday night.
I'll take Mr. Murphy, then Dr. Quinn, then Ms. Powell.
I was just going to say thank you. It doesn't actually sound like there may be a single metric that would do it. And that would be an answer also, at least to my question. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, I think, yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I think what a lot of people are saying, I'd love to see some type of stress testing, and we say metrics, but in the world that I came from originally as a bank board member, you look for stress tests. What if the loan portfolio performs one way versus another, and how do we react accordingly? So some people are familiar with this process, some people aren't, but I think it provides scenarios in layman's terms that it would allow us to make better decisions as a committee, to see option A, B, C, if this, then that, and you can kind of go through this very basic decision tree that would lead us to a better answer. I know it's more work, and I apologize for that in advance, but if we do the work now, say between now and Tuesday, I think our Tuesday meeting will be enlightening for not only the committee, but for our community. And then we can make a sound decision regarding, this stress testing scenario. What could happen? And I'll also mention quickly, in addition to that, and I apologize for the homework, and I appreciate everything that the teachers are doing. Trust me, those parents who have stayed home and taught their kids know how difficult the job of a teacher is. And so I respect teachers, principals immensely. The other thing too, I think the light at the end of the tunnel, a little bit of a silver lining, we do have a natural break. We all know that in the work world, right? Just putting the adult hat on, and less committee member, but adult. A lot of us are professionals and have jobs, and those on this call, I think we have 321 people on the call. A lot of us have jobs, and we have a natural break between Christmas and New Year's, and sometimes it's even slow at work between say the first week of January. So there's a natural break there where I think if we do our homework between now and Tuesday, we can make a good decision regarding the schools. And if we plan it right, we might just be able to, can't say please everyone, but we may be able to do a pause in a period of time where it works for the schools and the parents during that natural slow, it's slow business between Christmas, New Year's, and then that first week of January.
Thank you. Dr. Quinn?
I just wanted to add that something that that really hasn't been mentioned is that, we're saying, yes, we're going to open, or no, we're going to do distance learning. It's not entirely up to us. I mean, from what I'm hearing, we are at the breaking point, and it's a day-to-day decision. Are we going to be able to open school? And an advantage of planning a temporary pause to distance learning is that it allows people who need to plan how they're going to manage having their kids at home will at least be able to plan. If we get a call at 10 at night that says we're not going to be able to open the school tomorrow, they're still going to have to do that, but they're going to have no warning. Right, it's going to be out of the blue, and there's a very real possibility that can happen. And so I just think of a planned pause to give the staff and the faculty a chance to catch their breath and recover a little bit. In some ways, might be preferable to let's roll the dice and hope that we just get through it.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is that the committee does not want to take action one way or the other. We've gotten a lot of feedback, we've gotten a lot of input, and we've had almost 2 hours to discuss, which is terrific. I think we did need this extra time. If there's any additional information that, Ms. Meyer and Mr. Pedraza might want to, we've distilled some of our questions, I think. So if that is somehow, if any more of it is somehow quantifiable, we can take a look at Tuesday's meeting. We and the public have seen Ms. Meyer's recommendation, although we can certainly, it is within our scope to deliberate and possibly alter from that. I mean, historically, we typically, would take Ms. Meyer's recommendation or not something in between, but all of this is potentially on the table. So I do see 2 additional hands raised. I would just like to encourage them. It's Meredith Worthy and Mrs. Gorder again. I just, in the interest of time, I wanted to close public comment. We will have the opportunity to talk again on Tuesday, and I would just encourage both of them to reach out to the committee by email as well. I don't want to cut off public input, but I want to move forward. So, are there any additional comments from the committee before we entertain a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Powell, Ms. Powell.
And I know now we've talked about getting some sort of metric to give people, a more solid understanding of what might happen after January. But I'm actually wondering if in this moment, regardless of what that metric might be, Superintendent Meyer, is there anything you can think of that might happen between now and Tuesday that might make you change this recommendation to us? Like, are we going to be faced with a different question on Tuesday? Is there something that could happen between now and then that would change the action we're being asked to take?
Ms. Powell, thank you for that question. And I appreciate the question. And honestly, I will tell you, I wouldn't have put it forth if I thought, I was going to veer away from it. I will say that, like you, like Madam Chair, and really all of the members on the school committee, I very much appreciate people's comments and perspective on, how we support our students and how we make our schools work. From the beginning, we have said with all of this that, we can only do this by being in it together. It is the most unusual of times. It really is. And to Mrs. Armstrong's comment, I do think that our students are going to be far better people having gone through this. And I'm saying this as a parent of older kids, that I'm sort of sharing my parent hat with you now. There are many lessons in this that are going to be powerful and make them stronger, more capable people. They have already learned. And while I'm sitting here, I have gotten a few emails from students just saying thank you and communicating their perspective. They are stronger. They are more compassionate. They are more empathetic. They love school in a way that they didn't love it before. I will tell you, on that first day that we had kids in, I was standing outside of Hannaford, and a young student walked up on that first day with his mask on and looked at me and said, "I survived the quarantine." But you know, these are important lessons for our young people to learn, because there are many silver linings. So I would never come before you and make a recommendation that I didn't believe was in the best interest of the students in this district and their families and the faculty and staff. None of these are easy decisions, and they haven't been from day one. But you know, we have to think about the quality of what's happening inside the building when we don't have the appropriate staffing. If you're scrambling around to, cover a classroom and something meaningful isn't happening in there, I think you have to ask yourself that question. And to Mr. Quinn's point of view, giving staff the opportunity to plan and think about this so that they can meaningfully implement, distance learning rather than doing it on an emergency basis. I think there's value in thinking about that. So thank you for that opportunity to answer your question. I hope I did adequately do that.
Yes, thank you so much, Superintendent Meyer. And so I guess then what I'm wondering and would put to the committee, if perhaps it wouldn't be better to maybe take action on this tonight to at least give some clarity to our administration and staff, and then give the time between now and our meeting on Tuesday to think about what we would need to do to avoid this in the future, or to give some comfort to people that if we do decide to pause, that it wouldn't last, what we would do to make it not last beyond this period, or something like that. I don't know. I feel like if we're just going to be back here on Tuesday, that seems, I don't know, unless people just need time to think about it, which I guess would make sense. But.
I'd actually like to respond to that. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Munoz. Go ahead, please, and then I'll go. Thank you.
I want to echo what Ms. Powell just said, because it's a very natural, logical, completely reasonable approach to say, is there a metric either on the on the number of staff that needs to be present, or on the the illness and infection side. But again, I think Ms. Powell nailed it. These are both highly fluid situations. So I don't think there is a metric. I don't think there's a heuristic around staff. I think what we've heard Mrs. Meyer and Mr. Pedraza say is that, it's not just something that you can quantify, but they're getting these SOS calls on a fairly regular basis, almost daily, from each principal saying, I don't know if, we're staffed. And, I also think, an aggregate measure of how many staffers there are doesn't quite capture, who's a teacher, who's teaching remotely versus in the classroom, who's a support person, all those kinds of things. So I just, again, I appreciate the questions, which came up numerous times. It's logical, but I don't think there's going to be a metric. And I wouldn't want to set Mrs. Meyer and Mr. Pedraza off on a, for a few days to try to create one, or to, find some alchemy about, what a number might look like. And the same thing with the illness, because, the macro condition is, again, so volatile, so fluid, who knows? So anyway, I would be more inclined to make a decision now. I think also Dr. Quinn, talking about, traditionally, I mean, this is something where we should be deferring to, the operators and the leadership on the ground. To me, it's been a great discussion. I can't say enough about the thoughtfulness of all the community comments here in open session, and also these very articulate prose writers that sent notes to us that, really made some very compelling cases. So, but anyway, long story short, I just don't know what we would accomplish between now and next Tuesday. And I think what Mrs. Meyer just really started to hit on towards the end is that there are some benefits to making a decision, Mr. Pedraza as well. There are some benefits to making a decision on behalf of the educators. So anyway, I'd be more inclined to see if the committee is more interested in taking an action now based on where the discussion's gone.
Thank you. Dr. Quinn?
Sorry, I just want to second what Mr. Munoz just said. We tend to put a lot of faith in, oh, if we could come up with a number that quantifies it. It's not obvious to me how we would come up with a valid metric in the time frame we have. I think there's going to be a certain amount of a judgment call here, and I certainly appreciate Mr. Murphy's desire to, okay, well, let's lay out what is the criteria for decisions that we make. I mean, that's necessary. I just don't believe that we can find, let's boil it down to a number and that'll be the one. Then that's the rule. I don't think we can do that. And to the point of, do we take action tonight or do we wait till Tuesday? I wanted to have our council present. But again, if everybody's comfortable taking action, that's up to the committee.
Thank you, Dr. Quinn. I did want to weigh in. I appreciate all these comments. I mean, at some point, somebody can make a motion or not. That motion can be seconded. We could vote. It can pass, and then that's that. I guess what we can do, we can make a motion with, subject to any statewide mandate or that may come down between now and whenever. I will say that I am inclined, what we've heard a lot of in public comment and in the email correspondence, certainly there's a lot about our youngest learners. Just from my perspective, we're talking about 8 days of distance learning around the holidays. They're not always the most productive, but on the other hand, that's important socialization time. And I know for the youngest learners, that was one of the biggest hardships, not just the quality of the education and how it was delivered, but socially. But that being said, we've also heard concerns about working parents and to the extent that we can give them more notice than less, given that the unpredictability, just in the last week, 2 weeks, month, the more predictability we can give, or the more certainty we can give to working parents, I think might help. I'm also more comfortable knowing that there is sort of a light at the end of the tunnel with the potential for on-site vaccines, more vaccines, so that things can really begin to open up. So if we were to take action, Mrs. Meyer's plan or proposal is not indefinite. It's not. It's for such a finite amount of time, and it makes sense to my mind, just on either end of a break anyway, to give a longer pause. But I will leave that to the committee as to whether or not we should act on that tonight. And again, Dr. Quinn, to your point, Matt Oliverio confirmed that we are empowered to do this. This is our decision to make. But again, I'll just repeat what I've said before. But if you're not comfortable, we can certainly wait on that basis. So I would entertain any motion. Dr. Quinn?
I was just wondering, would it be possible to entertain a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendations kind of conditionally on any further guidance from the state or, a change in the situation on the ground here?
You can certainly make that motion. I would just be concerned with changes on the ground here. But yeah, we could, if you want to make that motion, if there's a second.
Okay, so with that, I will introduce a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendations with the caveat that if pending further guidance from the state or a change in the situation on the ground, we can revise the plan and maybe open up if she thinks that's prudent.
Is there a second? Alternatively, Ms. Powell. Seconded by Ms. Powell. Is there a discussion? Dr. McEwen.
So I think the changes on the ground was exactly, if I understand this correctly, what I was asking about with, if we have more information by, say, January 1, that we could open and not have that January pause, then we would. And what I was hearing as I asked that was, no, there was really good rationale from the district administration that we would go until the 8th and open the 11th. So the changes on the ground is very vague. If I interpret that as, if we get information that numbers are low and there's no real reason that we would have need to be in distance learning, that we would come back, then I'd be inclined to vote for that. But that would be my understanding of what we were doing, that we're still leaving, I don't have the dates in front of me, I think it is the 4th, as a possible opening. That's what that motion sounds like to me. If we're saying that the 4th is a possible opening, then I'd be voting yes, but I'm not sure we all have the same understanding of that motion.
Thank you, Dr. McEwen. I'm concerned with there are too many caveats to make it a firm motion. That's my concern as well. Ms. Powell?
My understanding in seconding was basically what Dr. McEwen said. So would it work to, I'm trying to think of how we could reword it. I feel like whenever we take these actions, they're always subject to change based on the recommendation of the superintendent. And it has been that way from the beginning with COVID. It's never been where we say, okay, we're going to do this pause till then, and Mrs. Meyer comes back to us and says, no, I actually think we can reopen, and we have a meeting on the 5th, that we wouldn't do that. So I feel like every action that we take when it comes to COVID is always almost sort of with an understanding, at least for me, that it is always subject to change based on the constantly changing conditions due to COVID, and that if the superintendent is always free to come to us with a different recommendation, whether that's to extend, to shorten, to whatever that is always an option. And that saying the pause is going to last to a certain day is to give people some way to plan. And that hopefully if we're going to do something to change that, we would try to give people enough notice to do so. But that's my understanding of all of these. None of them are particularly hard and fast because they can't be. So I don't know. But Dr. Quinn can correct me if that was not what he intended with his motion, or if we need to make a more specifically worded one.
No, I think that's Ms. Vicella's point, and I think it's certainly valid. If the motion's too vague, it's not. That's we need to make it more specific enough that everybody's comfortable, that we completely understand what we approve. That's all.
You may consider amending the motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation, subject to a state mandate that warrants additional days of distance learning, and or the superintendent's recommendation to return to in-person learning sooner than January 11th.
That sounds great. Okay, so help me with the
you can say you could, if you want to accept that amendment. I think that's the way we can do it. I think that's
okay.
proper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I'll accept that, and thank you.
Or we can make that a new motion. Sorry, now I'm getting all hung up on procedure. Help me, Mr. Murphy. I think if that's all right, we can have another second to that amended version. Thank you. Seconded by Ms. Powell. Okay. Is there any further discussion on that amended version of the motion? Any further discussion? And actually, Ms. DeMeglia, would you mind restating that motion, please, for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Dr. Quinn made a motion to accept the superintendent's recommendation subject to a state mandate that warrants additional days of distance learning, and or the superintendent's recommendation to return to in-person learning sooner than January 11th.
Thank you, Ms. DiMeglio. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll go to a roll call vote. Please signify by saying aye. Ms. DiMeglio?
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Kevin Murphy,
Nay.
William Hangan,
I'm sorry, we didn't hear you, Mr. Hangan. You're muted. I'm so sorry. I didn't catch it, so I don't know if Ms. DiMeglio did. I apologize.
I couldn't hear it, I'm sorry. What was the vote?
Mr. Hangan is muted right now.
Okay, I'll go to Mr. Muniz then.
Mr. Hangan, do we have your vote? I don't know if we can't hear you, if we can go to a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or if that's appropriate, because you may be having technical difficulty. Mr. Hangan is opposed to the motion.
Okay,
So the motion carries 5-2. Thank you. Thank you for this discussion. We will still have further discussion on Tuesday about what a lot of those aspects look like, additional data, and I'm sure there'll be more public discussion, but I think we got a lot of it. We heard a lot of comment. I really appreciate the public input. I appreciate the committee's time in this. I had slotted maybe an hour, clearly underestimated that. And most importantly, Ms. Meyer, Mr. Pedraza, this is not easy for you, any of our administrators. We've heard from our teachers, everybody. So, and again, anybody who I was not able to get to in public comment, please reach out to us by email, phone call, and come by on Tuesday and comment then. I just appreciate it all. Thank you. I think that was the only agenda item, so I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Quinn, seconded by Dr. McEwen. Roll call vote.
Allison Powell,
Aye.
Ann Musella,
Aye.
Jean Quinn,
Aye.
Lori McEwen,
Aye.
Kevin Murphy,
Aye.
William Hangan,
Aye.
Tim Muniz.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your time and your work on this. And we will see you at our joint meeting on Monday and our full school committee on Tuesday. Thank you.
Very well.
Have a great night.